Hi, Bio 245. This is Vanessa again, and we're going to be doing muscles of the arm or of the upper limb. So remember last time when we talked about the trunk and we had a lot of stabilization of the scapula, rotating it this way, that way, and the other. Arm's a little bit more simple, so I think you guys will like this. So like I said, I'm going to stick with the list, so you'll see me refer to the list, and I'm just looking to make sure I'm going in the correct order. Okay? Alright, so first things first, here is our just to orient you, I guess, elbow is going to be on this back side here. Thumb is always the radius side. And then here's our shoulder. I still have that deltoid removed just so you can see some of the muscles going on here. Okay, so on the anterior side of our arm and the upper arm in the brachial region, we have the biceps brachii. So the biceps brachii is referred to as the biceps brachii because it has two heads, and you can actually see that here. Biceps brachii, and of course brachii because it's in the brachial region. So there you go, biceps brachii. And its job in life is to do flexion at the elbow. So remember, whenever you're thinking about the functions of a muscle, always refer to that proper word, so flexion in this case, and at the joint or the bones. So in this case, flexion at the elbow will suffice. Moving on, we have the brachialis. The brachialis is sandwiched underneath the biceps brachii. So what I usually do to reveal it, here you can actually see it from this side really well. So here's our biceps brachii on the top, and deep to it is going to be our brachialis. You can actually take off your biceps brachii to fully reveal our brachialis deep to it. Okay, so there you go. And it's doing the same thing that the biceps brachii is. It's helping with flexion at the elbow. So there you go, brachialis. In this case, we're moving on down to look at the still kind of anterior side of the arm, but really along the radius. Next, we have the brachioradialis. So something that I want to show you real quick is that along the radius side, so the thumb side, because there's our thumb, right? Thumb is on the same side as the radius. On our radius side of our arm, you'll kind of see that there's this gap. See that? So here's that biceps brachii, and as you look down the center here, we have this gap. So generally we have flexors on one side of the gap and extensors on the other side of the gap. And when I talk about flexors and extensors, generally I'm talking about of the wrist. So, you know, extension of your wrist, flexion of your wrist, okay? So anyway, so here's that gap on the radial side, on the radius side. So extensors tend to be on this side, and that's the posterior side of your hand. And then flexors tend to be on the anterior side, okay? So there you go. So just to show you, again, here's that gap. On the extensor side of that gap, the first muscle you're going to run into is your brachioradialis. And it goes from your thumb and twists around, kind of almost back to the elbow. Okay, so that's going to be your brachioradialis. And it's called the brachioradialis because it's going from your brachial region down onto your radius or on the radial side. Okay? And this is going to help, again, with flexion of the elbow, but it's also going to help with supination. So that means turning your hand over. Because remember, pronation, pouring out your cup of soup, supination, holding a cup of soup. Okay? So it's going to help with supination. Some people also call the brachioradialis the beer holding muscle. So it helps you hold your beer like so. Okay? So anyway, moving on. Still on the brachial region here, but on the posterior side, so here's your elbow. There's the back side of your scapula, or the posterior aspect of it. This here is your triceps brachii, okay, on the back of your arm. So it's called the triceps brachii because it actually has three heads to it. So you can kind of see one of the heads here, one of the heads tucks up underneath here, and here's another head to it right here. So triceps brachii, and again, brachii is for the brachial region. This is going to help with extension at the elbow, so it helps you do one of these, okay? Now, if you're buff, you can almost see on me, if you're buff, it actually kind of looks like a horseshoe shape when you extend that arm, or when you extend your arm and that muscle contracts. So here's the meat of the muscle in that horseshoe shape. Moving on down, we have some deep muscles. So to see these deep muscles, you can actually take your arm model and start removing things. So for the next thing on your list, we have the Pronator teres. So you can actually, here's that brachioradialis. Remove that brachioradialis. The Pronator teres starts back here at the elbow, kind of on the inside of the arm here. Starts at the elbow and goes and wraps around over the top of the radius. So I think we can reveal a little bit more here. It doesn't help too much. But it goes from the elbow and it actually wraps over the top of the radius. And just based on the name, you'll know that the pronator teres is going to help with pronation. The other muscle that you see on here is the supinator. To see the supinator, you actually have to remove your extensors. The supinator goes all the way across the top here of like kind of your elbow region. So it's this broad muscle here, and you can see that it goes all the way across the top of your radius here. And that just based on the name, the supinator is going to help with supination. So that pronator teres starts back here at the elbow and wraps around over the top of your radius. And then the supinator kind of covers the top of the radius and comes down the other direction to the underside of the radius. Okay, so they're doing opposing actions. All right, so let's move on, continuing down the list. I'm going to put these more superficial guys back on so we can actually look at them. Next we have the flexors in general. So first off, we're going to start off with the Flexor carpi radialis. It's a flexor because we're on the anterior side of our arm, in this case the antebrachial region. And it says carpi because it actually ultimately crosses the carpal region, and radialis because it's going along the radius. So remember, I told you that there's this gap here that are along your radius, and then the extensors are on one side and the flexors are on the other side. So here is your flexor carpi radialis, okay? And here, just so you can see in relation to the thumb, so here's your thumb, and then following up, here's your flexor carpi radialis. So just remember, it's on the flexor side, so on the anterior portion of your antebrachial region on the thumb side, okay? Next is the Flexor carpi ulnaris. The Flexor carpi ulnaris, alternatively, will be on the pinky side. And in fact, you can actually see the ulna poking out right here. Okay? So you also have a gap on this side. On one side of that gap will be the extensors, and on the other side of that gap will be the flexors. So here's the ulna, so that is the gap. So on the anterior portion of your antebrachial region, on the pinky side, on the flexor side of that gap, is the Flexor carpi ulnaris. Carpi because it's crossing over the carpal region, ulnaris because it's going over the ulna on your pinky side, and it's flexor because it's flexing. Okay. Moving on, we have the Flexor digitorum superficialis and the Palmaris longus, and I'm actually going to do this out of order, and you'll see why in a second. So the Palmaris longus is in the center of our Flexor carpi radialis and our Flexor carpi ulnaris. Still doing the same job. It is actually the most superficial flexor here. So you can actually see, again, here's your ulnaris, there's your radialis. So here is your palmaris longus down the center. And you can kind of see that there's this white cuff that goes along the wrist over the carpals, right? And that palmaris longus actually crosses over it because it is just so superficial. So you can see that little tendon there sticking out. Actually, for the palmaris longus, not everybody has both palmaris longuses intact. Some people don't have them at all. So I'll show you on me. If you kind of pinch your pinky and thumb together and lean your hands forward a little bit, you'll actually make that tendon kind of jump out. So for me, let's try and find an angle where you can actually see it. I can see it, but maybe. There we go. So here is my palmaris longus on my right hand, and on my left hand, I don't have one at all. Okay, so this is not atypical. A lot of people have it in one hand, but not in the other. But yeah, there you go. So the tendon sticking on that side, but not on that side. Okay, at least not really. So some people have them, some people don't. That's your palmaris longus. Now, if you cut your palmaris longus, so you can actually see, if you cut that palmaris longus and peel it on back, deep to it, so I'm going to try and point to it. It's hard doing it backwards on the screen here, but if you point to it, it's on either side of your palmaris longus, like so. That is going to be your Flexor digitorum superficialis. Flexor digitorum superficialis. So, yes. So, yeah, so you would cut your palmaris longus and then you would reveal it in its entirety. And it's good, it's going to help with flexion. Okay, the extensors are a little bit easier. So, here's our flexors. Let's turn that arm around and look at our extensors. And again, when we're talking about our extensors, look for those gaps. So here's the ulna, so that's the gap on the pinky side, on the ulnaris side, right? And then here is our gap on the radial side, on the radialis side. Okay, so let's move to our extensors. Okay, so first things first, we have the Extensor, carpi, radialis, longus. So just keep all those words in mind, okay? So for the Extensor, carpi, radialis, longus, we're actually going to go kind of back over to our brachioradialis. So here's our brachioradialis. Again, it's just on the other side of that gap, right? So on that same kind of chunk here, because remember I took off that whole chunk. So on the same chunk here, right next to it, that is your Extensor, carpi, radialis, superficialis, right? Longus, sorry. Extensor, carpi, radialis, longus. We changed the name from last semester. So Extensor, carpi, radialis, longus. So again, you follow all the way down, and you can see it goes right into the thumb. Okay? So generally, if you're confused about where a muscle is, if you're looking at a radialis or whatever you're looking at, I always look, okay, well, what digit is it going into? So if it's a radialis, generally it's going over toward the thumb. Okay? So there's your Extensor, carpi, radialis, longus. Next, we have the Extensor, carpi, ulnaris, and this requires some twisting around a little bit. So here's your ulna, right? So this is the extensor side right here. So this is going to be your Extensor, carpi, ulnaris, and you can kind of see that there's a bunch of little muscles making it up. If I put a sticker on this band of muscle here that's going into the pinky, just trust me, it's the Extensor, carpi, ulnaris. Okay. Moving on, we have the Extensor, carpi, digitorum. Oh, sorry, it's just the Extensor digitorum. Extensor digitorum. There's no carpi in this guy, but he is the guy in the middle, right here. Okay, so here's your radialis. Here's your ulnaris. So in the center here, we have our Extensor digitorum. Extensor digitorum. Okay? Moving on. Oh, that's it.
To the lower limb.
All right, so that is all the muscles of the upper limb or the arm and all of their functions. So join us again for the leg video.